This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Check it out for a great place to buy sealed products or singles at cardkingdom.com. Hello everyone, I'm Nita Hone, and it is Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. I ran a poll for last week's video between First Strike and Artifact Creatures, and while Artifact Creatures won, and that's the video I did last week, it was not by much. So this week, I'll be looking at First Strike. First Strike is one of Magic's oldest keyword abilities. Like Flying and Trample, it has been around since the beginning, and it's been an evergreen keyword that whole time. It's a pretty intuitive keyword ability, as it quite literally lets your creature strike first in combat. It primarily appears on red and white cards, and flavor-wise, it is meant to convey that a creature has superior skill in fighting, at least when it comes to speed and dexterity. To be eligible for this list, a card has to have First Strike in the text box. In other words, it has to have First Strike, grant First Strike, create creature tokens that have First Strike, or have the ability to gain First Strike. In all, there are 520 cards in Magic that fit this criteria. In this video, I'm going to look at the 10 that have had the biggest impact on Magic's competitive scene. Before we get started, a quick reminder on how I scored these lists. Pro Tour top 8s and Vintage and Legacy Championship top 8s are worth 2 points, and Grand Prix top 8s are worth 1 point. At number 10, we have the first of two Knights to make the list. Turns out that First Strike is a pretty common keyword on Knights. Anyway, this first one is Fiend Slayer Paladin. Sporting not only First Strike, but also lifelink, and being immune from removal spells from the two colors the best at removing things, that altogether is a pretty formidable creature. In Standard, it saw play in Bant Hexproof decks, which sought to drop powerful auras on creatures with Hexproof. This was incredibly hard for removal to deal with. While the Paladin doesn't quite have Hexproof, the fact that it was harder to kill than most creatures still made it a good place to put your Rancor. It also saw play in more controlling sideboards, where it could be brought in against aggressive decks as a great blocker who gains you life that is also hard to remove. It has never seen play outside of Standard, and I don't think it ever will, so it may come off this list in the near future. However, most of the cards close to it in score aren't seeing play right now either. At number 9, we have a creature who does not have First Strike itself, but it brings a friend along who has First Strike, and that's Blade Splicer. 3 mana for 4/4 worth of stats, 3 of which has First Strike, is an excellent deal. Sure, the Golem loses the First Strike if you lose your Splicer, but you're still coming out ahead if they decide to waste 2 cards on the Splicer and its buddy. In Standard, it saw play in Green-White Aggro, Blue-White Delver, and Nyapod primarily. It was particularly nice with Birthing Pod because you could search it up or cast it and get your Golem, but then sacrifice the Splicer to the pod to continue to move up the chain to your combo pieces. It has also seen play intermittently in Modern, with its most common home there being Hate Bear decks. Its most recent Modern Grand Prix top 8 was in 2017, so it probably isn't quite done yet, though its rate of play has dropped considerably. At number 8, we have an equipment that grants First Strike, and that's Rune Chanters Pike. Most at home in a deck loaded with instants and sorceries, Rune Chanters Pike can turn any creature into a threat, and First Strike is a huge part of that, since it will become pretty impossible for your opponent to deal with the creature in combat if it has a huge power boost and First Strike. The Pike just happened to be in Standard when there were a lot of good reasons to build a deck jammed pack of instants and sorceries, with Delver of Secrets being at the top of that list. The two worked really well together, not just because the Delver loves instants and sorceries too, but because after it transforms into Insectile Aberration, it gains Flying, allowing you to equip this and do huge amounts of damage in the air. Various Delver decks, with Blue-White Delver being the most common, is where the Pike saw all of its play in Standard. At number 7, we have the other Knight on the list, and that's Knight of the White Orchid. While it has only seen play in Standard, it managed to do so in Standard formats 8 years apart from one another. It's an interesting card because it is one of a few white cards that are out there that actually lets you search your library for a land, which sort of seems like a green effect, but white versions of this effect only let you do it if you have fewer lands in play than your opponent. That, coupled with nice aggressive stats and First Strike, make this a nice card. When it was originally printed in Shards of Alara back in 2008, it saw play primarily in decks like Mono White Tokens and Kithkin, aggro decks. Its second time it was printed in Magic Origins, and it benefited from the fact that it was in a format with lands that actually had 2 land types, making it see a lot of play because it could search up those dual-typed lands. It saw play in decks like Selesnya Aggro, Bant Megamorph, and White Weenie. It has never found its way into non-rotating formats, and I don't think it's going to, but who knows, maybe it'll get another Standard legal reprint, and it will probably be excellent in Standard next time we see it, just like it was the other times. At number 6, we have the first of 2 Thalias on the list, with the first one, of course, being the more recently printed one, and that is Thalia Heretic Cathar. In addition to having First Strike and efficient stats, it also makes it so your opponent's creatures are going to be able to block less frequently, since she makes them come into play tapped. This can create some serious problems for your opponent, because it gets to be more and more devastating the more creatures you have in play. If you're curving into Athaliah on turn 3 after 1 and 2 drops, your opponent's going to be in a world of trouble. It also makes non-basic lands come into play tapped, which is also frustrating. While most of her play has come in Standard, she also has done some work recently in non-rotating formats. She appears in some versions of the Humans deck and in Collected Company decks in Modern, and in Hate Bear and Eldrazi aggro in Vintage. She also has a top 16 in Legacy's Death and Taxes deck, so it probably won't be long before she puts up some points there too. At number 5, we have a creature that doesn't always have first strike, but you can give it to him when he needs it, and that's Boros Reckoner. Between coming with an efficient body that can gain first strike and the fact that it lets you burn a player or creature anytime it's damaged, the Reckoner is a huge pain to have to deal with. Killing it in combat is basically a terrible idea, and killing it with spells that do damage are too, because you're always going to be getting 2 for 1 if that's what you try to do. So, you have to kill it with a spell that just says destroy target creature to come out completely clean. The Reckoner saw all of its play in Standard, helping make a variety of aggro decks incredibly potent during its time there, including Naya, Gruul, and Burn decks. Late in its time in Standard, Theros was released, and with it the Devotion mechanic, and the fact that this already super good card added 3 red Devotion and 3 white Devotion for you was pretty awesome for decks that cared about Devotion. While it did see heavy play in Standard, it hasn't picked up a top 8 at a Premier event since 2014, and it seems unlikely that it will going forward, so Thalia Heretic Cathar will probably pass the Reckoner in the next year or so. At number 4, we have a creature sporting a whole bunch of keyword abilities, with First Strike just being one of many, and that's Bane Slayer Angel, who as you can see was also featured on the Protection video and the Lifelink video. Because of Lifelink, she provides a 10-point life swing when she connects with the opponent. In other words, your opponent loses 5 life and you gain 5 life, so it creates a huge gap in your opponent's and your life total. And she'll be hitting your opponent most of the time when she attacks because she has both flying and first strike, making her difficult to block. Her protection from dragons was even relevant when she was around, as Broodmate Dragon was a commonly played card at the time and she made him look pretty bad. While in Standard, she saw play in tons of different decks, Blue-White Control and Bant Control chief among them, but then Caw-Blade emerged, one of the most dominant decks ever to exist in a Standard format, and she went along for the ride as one of the ways the deck had to win the game, and put up absurd numbers, the most impressive perhaps being picking up 4 top 8s at Pro Tour Paris in 2011. Eventually, steps were taken to weaken Caw-Blade with bannings, and while the Angel went untouched, she stopped seeing as much play without the powerful supporting cast. She saw some play in Extended too, appearing in both Zoo and Control decks. After the demise of Extended, she saw play in the modern versions of Caw-Blade, which got to keep living on for a bit, and in Esper Control decks. She went 4 years without seeing play in Modern until earlier this year, when she found her way into modern Blue-White Control decks that managed to top 8 at Pro Tour 25th. This could mean she's going to start seeing more play in Modern, which gives her a good chance to pass some of the cards in front of her. At number 3, we have a creature who can gain First Strike if you have enough artifacts laying around, and that's Toolcraft Exemplar. Sure, he needs some artifacts, but he's effectively a 1-mana 3/2 with First Strike in decks that run them, and wouldn't you know it, Wizards printed a bunch of really good artifacts in Kaladesh block, many of them vehicles, so assembling a deck where he can put his tools to good use isn't very difficult, and as a result he does a ton of damage very quickly. His most consistent home in Standard was a variety of vehicle decks, but he has been in less vehicle-heavy aggro decks too. Now that he's rotated out of Standard, he doesn't seem like a likely candidate to see play in non-rotating formats, since those artifact aggro decks are generally interested in playing artifacts over non-artifacts like Toolcraft Exemplar. At number 2, we have the only mono-red card on the list, and it's also the newest card to make the list, and that is Kari Zev's Skyship Raider. A card with a very cool design, giving her both Menace and First Strike makes it kind of a pain to block her, which is especially nice when she brings her monkey friend around every time she attacks. While she was in Standard, she was a pretty frightening 2-drop, since managing to stop the 3 damage she sent your way every turn wasn't the easiest thing to do. Early on in her time in Standard, mono-red aggro decks were the best decks around, and as one of the best 2-drops in Standard, she went along for the ride. These Ramunap red decks had one of its keycards banned in Ramunap Ruins, but this was well after some pretty insane showings, such as at Pro Tour Hour of Devastation, where 6 of the top 8 decks were Ramunap red decks running Kari Zev. Almost every Grand Prix in the months thereafter also had multiple Ramunap red decks in the top 8. Even after the Ruins got banned, Kari Zev still found home in mono-red aggro decks and Rakdos aggro decks. While she's efficient, I don't think she's quite efficient enough to find her way into aggro decks in non-rotating formats, so I think she's probably done at the 59 points she has right now. At number 1, we have the other Thalia, of course, Talia Guardian of Thraben. Between having nice aggressive stats and making non-creature spells more expensive, this card is a real pain for control decks to deal with. Making their board sweepers cost 1 more mana is often exactly what you need to be able to kill them before that sweeper gets cast. She gives you a lot for 2 mana, and as a result, she has been a multi-format all-star. She had 1 Innistrad block Pro Tour top 8 in a green-white aggro deck, In Standard, she saw play in the eponymous Thalia White Weenie deck, as well as in various other aggro decks like Green White Humans, Azorius Humans, Naya Humans, and Selesnya aggro. In Modern, she has seen play in Hate Bear and Birthing Pod in the days before it was banned, and more recently in the 5-color Human deck that's doing really well in Modern right now. In Legacy, she's a key card in Death and Taxes decks, and in Vintage, she sees play in Eldrazi aggro decks, which almost exclusively play creatures, making Thalia a good fit for the deck despite not being an Eldrazi herself. She has had a pretty great 2018 thanks in large part to the emergence of Humans in Modern, and has added 24 points to her score, and I would imagine she's going to hold on to the #1 spot on this list for the foreseeable future. Well, that does it for this week's MTG Top 10. In addition to doing my usual MTG Top 10 next Friday, I'll be doing a bonus one on Monday where I will reveal a preview card from Ultimate Masters and do a top 10 list inspired by that card. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe and click on the bell to make sure you get notified every time I upload a new video. Thanks for watching.